I want to talk to you today about the divine ambush of love. Now, that sounds scary, doesn't it, when you think about ambush, being ambushed by God. And it might even sound a bit threatening. You know, the first time I ever ran into this was whenever I made a retreat, maybe 30 years ago, and that was the title of it, The Divine Ambush of God. The interruption of God is another way of saying that. And the theme of the retreat had to do with conversions. Like, for example, we started out with Saul to Paul. You know, so it was on this road to Damascus that he was knocked off his horse, and God interrupted him, and he became Paul. You know, and it went through people like St. Augustine, it went through people like Martin Luther King, went through people like Martin Luther. And so all this about these divine interruptions. So that's what I think the gospel is talking a little bit about today. God interrupts us. Sometimes it takes an interruption, an ambush, in order to let it sink in. Like, for example, an interruption in life. Some of you might know how eagles teach their eaglets how to fly. You know, if you've ever seen an eagle's nest, one of them that's on these cliffs, you know, these incredible nests, and you see these eagles that will part from the nest. And if I remember one time being in a boat looking up at them, and the wingspan is like 6 feet, and whenever it's a clear blue day, you kind of like see under them, and that blue behind them is just incredibly gorgeous. It's just so moving. It's just such a fantastic aura, you know, to see one of these eagles alight into space. It's majestic. No wonder our national bird is an eagle. You know, just such a beautiful thing. What you might not know is how an eagle trains her eaglets to fly. And so here's how it goes with this particular brand of eagle. The little chicks are in the nest, and so their first observation of flight is whenever they see their mother going back and forth feeding them. So they notice something special about her. And so probably that's put into their DNA somehow, or at least it awakens in the DNA that potential for them. And then the day comes, and somehow that eagle senses this. And what she does is she puts herself into the nest. And whenever she puts herself into the nest, what happens is she starts to take up all the space, and those little eaglets are knocked out. All right? Now, they're way high on this cliff. Now, can you imagine what might be going on in this eaglet's mind? You know, mother, what's got into you? You know, you're knocking me out of this nest. I'm about to die. And what happens is it must be terrifying for that little eaglet. But somehow on that path down, that quick ride down, all of a sudden that eaglet discovers something. It goes like this. And all of a sudden there's wings, and it alights into the sky. Thank God for the interruption. It's a wonderful thing. So I think that what we're hearing today in the gospel is that God wants to get into you and me. God wants to give himself to us. And it doesn't happen when we're necessarily ready. Because a lot of times when we're ready, we are too much in control. We are too much in charge, and we are too distracted to allow it to happen. It happens when we're not so ready. So, when God wants to give himself away to us in ways that are just unimaginable, it's not business like usual. It's when we're off guard. It's oftentimes when we don't expect it. It's oftentimes whenever it would be the least place where you'd find the interruption. And that's how God tends to come to us, all of us. And so sometimes it's in the presence of silence. Sometimes it's in the presence of love. It's amazing what parents can do whenever they see their newborn child. The kind of things, the steps that they can do in their new life. And sometimes it's in the presence of suffering. And that's whenever we're not in control, we're vulnerable, and God can come in. I'm told this story about a man by the name of Randy Hoyt. He and his wife were about to have another child. This was some 20 years ago or so. And she was in her 6th month of pregnancy. And six and a half months into the pregnancy, she started to have these signs that the baby was on its way. And so they rushed her to the hospital, and they had to do a cesarean, and they could not stop the bleeding. So things became just from joy to like this incredible dread. And this went on for 16 days. They did give birth to the baby who lived, but for 16 days it was touch and go. And Randy was praying so hard, God, please heal. Please let the doctors find a way. But on the 16th day, both the mother, Chris, and the daughter died. And so he went home and just didn't know what to do because he had 6 little kids at home that he had to raise now by himself. And so he was just like, why, God? Why would this happen? This incredible, unbelievable thing. I mean, just, 2 weeks ago we were enjoying our life, and how could this ever happen? And so you can imagine how awful this must have been for him. And so what he started to notice was in the days that were going on, the normal people were coming in and trying to be helpful. And then after maybe 4 or 5 days, he started getting these enormous amounts of emails of support, started to get these letters, started to have people show up at his house offering to help him. And then he started to find money pouring in for coverage for the hospital bills. And then within 6 months, he ended up paying off his mortgage. And then he started to get a little bit of hope back, and he started to maybe entertain an idea that she still lives, that Chris, his wife, still lives somewhere, and that maybe in some day, in some age, it might be possible to be with her again in some fashion. And so this started to come back, and in about 1.5 years, he started to go back to his work again. He was finally able to do that. And then about 2 years into the grief, he had this one morning where he realized that God was good. And he said that it still hurt him terribly bad, but he got a new insight that he believes to this day. See, it's really interesting how this all works. Whenever we look at Matthew's gospel, and this is the year of Matthew, year A, so we'll hear a lot of Matthew. It's peculiar why we have this particular reading starting us off. It's an eschatological reading. It's about the end times. And I don't know about you, but when you hear some of those things, they sound a bit threatening, don't they? Whenever you hear that 2 will be in a field, 1 will be taken and 1 will be left. 2 will be milling grains, and 1 will be taken and 1 will be left. It just sounds a little bit threatening, doesn't it, whenever you think of that whole thing? So, what is the purpose of Matthew, and why do we have it as the start of Advent? Well, the purpose of Matthew here is this, that history will end well. See, that's what the message is. The message is that history will end well. It's not going to be like an apocalypse. It's not going to be like the end times where things will be devastation. The Son of Man returns. The Son of God returns. It's a happy ending. There's salvation. And that's the good news. And so that's what I think we have to keep in mind. Oftentimes, what happens to a lot of us is that whenever we are in our spiritual life intentionally, our spiritual life is pretty much under our control. We know our prayers, we learn our songs, we sing our hymns. A lot of times when we come to church, it's like that too. We're very busy about doing the right thing. This may be disappointing to hear, but a lot of people don't actually have those intimate experiences with God in here. This is a great place to stir the pot. This is a place where you get your energy lifted up. This is the place where you believe that it's worthwhile, where you can get the support of one another, and you can figure it out that things will be good. But generally, you don't have that intimate experience of God as God wants for you to have in a place like this. It usually happens whenever you're walking down the street and all of a sudden the veil opens and it all makes sense. Or it usually happens whenever we are not expecting it in an interruption, and then things come and then they end up making sense. See, that's the hope of what today's Advent celebration is be open to the interruptions of God. It may happen in your vulnerable moments, but be open. There's a message there that you can't get any other way. May the Lord who brought us here today, may the Lord who gives us hope guide our minds. Help us to not take interruptions from God as things that are to work against us. Let's take them as things that will make all things good, make all things right, make all things hopeful. Amen.